Hello everyone and welcome back to the next video on the rebuild of this Gardner 6LXB. Following on from the last video where we got the assembly here prepped and painted, we can now start refitting ancillary components. We're going to start by refitting the water pump drive and the pipework for the block, and we'll then get all the starter motor refitted before moving on to the other side of the engine. So here we have the water pump drive, again overhauled with all new bearings. You can see we've put a bead of sealant around it. Now when this goes in, you need to make sure that these holes, which are an oil drain, are at the bottom. You'll also see it's pegged, so it'll only go in one way round anyway. So we'll get that in. And now these two studs we can put nuts on, but the other two need the water pump in place first. There we go. So we're now going to get the water rail put on, which goes onto these two connections here. So, new gaskets first. There we go, that's the water rail all on. So as we recondition quite a few of these engines, this is the original pump for the engine, but we normally do these in batches, so this isn't getting refitted to the engine. We have a reconditioned unit that will go on. So now all the water pump and water pipe work is fitted, our next job is to get the starter motor reinstalled. Now this engine's fitted with the CAV SL5 starter motor, which is a 5-inch body, but this cradle here is machined to be able to take a 6-inch starter motor. So the first job to do is to reinstall this spacer, which spaces out from a 6-inch cradle to a 5-inch cradle. So with the spacer installed, the next job is to refit this strap clamp, which secures the starter motor to the engine. So with the strap all installed, we're now ready to fit the starter motor. For this engine, we have a reconditioned starter motor. This is a 24 volt SL5 starter motor. Now, one thing you have to bear in mind when fitting this is that the gap between the end of the pinion and the back of the ring gear is correct. So we've got a spacer collar to go on, and then we'll slide this into place. So with the starter motor all fitted and the pinion to flywheel gap fine, we're now going to carry on outfitting this side of the engine. So we're just putting in new manifold studs. Now, you may have seen in one of the earlier videos that the originals were very corroded and we actually had to angle grind a couple off to get the manifolds removed. So these are new studs. We have new clamps to go with them when the manifolds go on. So next up on the to-do list is to refit the top water rails. We've already refitted the studs to save you guys having to watch that. So we'll get all the gaskets on, fit the rubber jumper between the two halves of the manifold, and then get them back onto the engine. There we go, that's the top water rails all fitted. So the next thing on the list of things to do is to refit the clutch. Now, to be able to do this, we need a clutch alignment pin to ensure that the clutch plate is concentric with the flywheel and clutch pressure plate. Now, we don't have one for this size clutch, so we're just going to jump on the lathe quickly, make one up, and then we'll get on with fitting the clutch. So here we are, clutch alignment pin all finished. This will locate into the bearing in the flywheel. We can then slide the friction plate over and then fit the pressure plate. So let's get on with it. Here's the clutch friction plate. Now this is the original friction plate that was fitted to this engine, which you would have seen us remove in one of the earlier videos. This has been reconditioned by one of our local specialists, so ready to go back on. There we go, that's it over the pin. We can now fit the pressure plate. There we go, that's the clutch all tightened on. So here we are with one of the two cylinder heads off the engine. It's been lightly refaced to make sure it's flat. You'll also be able to see it's missing its valve guide, so this is the bare casting. We're going to fit in new valve guides and then recut the valve seats, ready for new valves. So before we do that, we're going to give the head a final light clean because it's still a little bit grubby in a few places. And then get on with assembly. So here we are with all the new valve guides pressed in. So with the cylinder heads all ready to be refitted to the engine, it's now time to get the block ready. So we've got the laborious task of refitting all the studs. Now this takes a very long time, so this section of video you're currently watching is playing at 1500 times its normal speed. So as you can imagine, this actually took quite a long time to do. So with the head studs all back in the cylinder block, it was then time to fit the head gaskets and the O-rings and ferrules for the water jacket before putting the cylinder heads back on. So you can now see we've got the head back onto the top of the block. It's not tightened down. You can probably just about see there's a gap underneath it. That is the head sat on the top of the rubber O-rings that are for the water jackets, the water passages. So we now need to start the torquing sequence to tighten it down, which goes up in stages to its final torque. So here we are with the first cylinder head all torqued down. So we'll get the decompressor shaft back in and the plug in this end of the cylinder head for the rocker shafts, and then we can fit the next cylinder head. So here we are with the decompressor shaft pushed back into place. This just needs to be in before the next cylinder head goes on because you can't get it in afterwards, as does the plug in the end of the head here. So we'll finish fitting the rest of the items that go on this shaft after both heads are on. So that's both cylinder heads now installed. So we'll carry on starting fitting other components. I think we'll probably start by fitting all of the side plates back on, just so it says Gardner on the engine. So with all of the side plates now on and the engine now carrying the Gardner brand again, we will refit the other decompression shaft along with all of the push rods and rockers so that we can complete the cam timing. So here we are with all the rockers back in place. So the next job is the cam timing. Now, none of these have had the valve clearances set yet. And for cam timing, there is actually a different setting to the final valve clearances. So we're going to set the valve clearances for doing the cam timing, get the cam timing done, and then we will reset these for their finished amount of valve clearance. Right, so that's all the valve clearances set to 25 thousandths of an inch for us to be able to do the cam timing. So we'll move on to that. The next job's to get this injector pump drive back in. Now, for orientation of this silver plate, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's got top cast in it, but we also need to make sure as it goes in, the injection timing marks here line up with the timing mark on the camshaft. So we'll do that first. So to be able to fit the injector pump drive shaft, we need to get the engine in the correct position for timing. As you can see at the moment, the mark needs to be roughly at the 3 o'clock position, with these two dots on the chain wheel lined up with the marks on the case here and here. But you can also see there's a dot on the end of this tooth here. This needs to go in between the two teeth on the injector pump drive shaft that are also dot marked. So we need to turn the engine over a little bit more, and once we've done that, we can fit the shaft. So that's the injector pump drive shaft loosely pushed into place, and you can see that the timing marks here all line up. So that's good to be bolted into place. So there we go, that's the injector pump drive all installed. Next job is to refit the advance and retard unit. There we go, that's that pushed into place, so we get that bolted on. So in an earlier video, we loosely timed the camshaft using the dot marks that Gardner provide. However, we mentioned that you need to properly time in the cam because the camshaft itself is on a slotted gear wheel. So the dot marks will get you close, but it won't get you in exactly the right position. So what we've done is we've set up this pointer and protractor on the crankshaft. And then what we can do is check the angles at which inlet valves open and exhaust valves close. Ignore all the timing marks on this disc, because this disc, all of these marks here are actually for an LW, not an LXB. The clock gauge here we're actually just using as a pointer, so you'll see they've scribed a blue line on it against 0. So we're going to take it back from TDC and then come up to the point that the inlet valve on number 1 starts to open, and then we can measure off what degrees that is. Right, so we've pulled it back to about 20 degrees before TDC. What we'll do is we'll move up towards TDC and see at which point the inlet valve begins to open. That's it there. So there we go. We have 10 degrees before TDC. So with 10 degrees now recorded for the inlet opening on cylinder 1, we'll go past TDC and see at which point the exhaust valve closes. And there we go. So we've got the exhaust valve closing at 17 degrees after TDC. So that makes a total of 27 degrees. So there's a 1 degree loss of overlap there, as the Gardner stated for 5D cams, which is what this engine is fitted with, is 28 degrees. And also, with it opening at 10 degrees before TDC for the inlet valve, the actual requirement is 16.25. So we're quite a way off on cam timing, in the sense that the whole sequence is happening about 6 degrees too late. So before we go adjusting it for cylinder 1, we need to check all of the other cylinders to make sure that we're basing our timing on the data from all 6 cylinders. So we've now checked the valve overlap on the rest of the cylinders. Now we have 1.25 degrees of variation across all of them, but what all the measurements do prove is that the whole camshaft is about 6 degrees retarded at the moment. So we're going to advance the camshaft, and what it also shows is that you cannot rely on just the dots on the crankcase for correct cam timing. So anyway, we're going to correct that now before resetting the tension on the cam chain, fitting the front cover, and then we'll set the valve clearances for their final running clearances. Right, so that's now timed correctly with inlet opening at 16.25 degrees. So we'll nip that up and check it again. And if that's okay, then we'll torque up this chain wheel. Yep, right, so we've adjusted the camshaft for the cylinder that's got the least error, which is cylinder 3. So that actually has 28 degrees of overlap as per the original manufacturer's manual. So we've now been back round and checked that cylinder 1 is in the correct position, and that the timing is correct on 1. So it is. So we're now going to torque these up and put the front cover on. There we go, time for the front cover. There we go, and get the front cover bolted on. And there we go, front cover all back on. So next job, we'll reinstall the locking plate that goes here before setting the valve clearances for their running clearance. So next up on the to-do list is to refit the fan. So we'll start with the fan bracket. That's that. There we go, that's the bracket back on. So again, overhauled, all new bearings. There we go, that's that fully home. So next up is to refit the thermostat housing. This has been reconditioned with 2 new thermostats inside. So we'll get this fitted and then refit the pipe that connects it to the water pump. There we go, thermostat back on. So next up is to refit this water pipe. We've put the gasket onto the water pump. It's got a film of sealant on it. Same on the bottom of this flange. So we'll get this put on and connected up. There we go. There we go, thermostat and the pipework back to the water pump all fitted. So just to finish off the water system this side, we'll now get the, there's a hose tail that goes in here and a temperature sender that goes in this one. So we'll get those back in. There we go. So to finish off this side of the engine, we need to fit the manifolds, the inlet and exhaust manifolds. So we'll get that done, and then that is everything assembled on this side of the engine, ready for test running. So that's all the seals for the exhaust manifold. So we'll now fit these inlet manifold rings, and then we'll be ready to fit the manifolds. There we go. So the first manifold to go on is the exhaust manifold. So we'll lift that into place. And then the inlet manifold. There we go, that's both manifolds in place. So the next job is to put the clamps on that hold it on. As you may remember in one of the earlier videos, we had to cut some of these off, so these are all new. And these go in place like so. There we go. So that's all the manifold clamps in place. So we'll get those torqued up to the 28 Newton meters that they're supposed to be, and then we'll get the inlet trumpet bolted on. There we go. So we'll now get the inlet trumpet back on. There we go. So with the other side of the engine all finished and ready for test run, we've got a few little jobs to do this side before we can't continue until the cam box is fitted. So first up on the little jobs list is to fit this, which is the oil pipe work for the rockers. So we'll get that fitted first. There we go. That is the feed pipe work for the rocker shafts back in. Next job is we'll fit the oil feed pipe work that runs from here to the air compressor. So that's us done with all the small jobs on this side of the engine that can be done before the cam box is fitted. We've fitted the alternator securing bracketry, and we shan't refit that until the engine has been test run, because we don't have the regulator and stuff to connect the alternator up, so that will go on after test running. The oil pressure switch has been fitted. And the breather air filter has been fitted. So that's as far as we can go with this engine until the cam box is done. So we'll leave this video here, and in the next video will be us sorting out the cam box ready for refitting to the engine and getting it all refitted ready for test run. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed watching this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.